Let's see if this is working. Okay, we are now live, I believe. Let me check one more thing. See. Okay, I think everything's okay. So we can start. Well, hello again, Farshid. Thank you for doing this. How are you? Everything is okay there? You're in London, right? Okay, hopefully we're gonna have a pleasant conversation. Welcome to the Institute of Architecture. This is a new space here in Argentina, an independent organization that we're trying to build, trying in a sense to get together influencer thinkers around the world, architects and designers, and try to spread the word, mostly in Latin America, about things that are happening in real time. So we're kind of little, but we're trying to doing things at the moment they're happening. We're trying to bring them the fastest we can here. So today I have the pleasure to talk with Farshid. I'm going to make a brief presentation, and then we're going to go briefly through some of your work back to the 1990s till today. I will be asking you some questions, and hopefully we'll have a conversation where we can explore more deeply into your work and the great influence I believe it has on architectural practice today. Farshid Moussavi is the principal at Farshid Moussavi Architecture, professor in practice of architecture at Harvard University Graduate School of Design, a renowned theorist and an influential practitioner since her days leading Foreign Office Architects, the office she co-founded together with Alejandro Saera-Polo. Today, we're celebrating the last event of a series of activities that explore the problem of form in contemporary architecture. We started this series with a lecture by Peter Eisenman, we may say the pioneer in process-driven design, since his and other influential architects' explorations back in the 1970s and 1980s, a multiplicity of practices emerged occupied in thinking and rethinking the way we can produce architectural form in an ever-changing way. Greg Lynn, Jesse Reiser, and Nana Kumemoto, Lars Spulbroek, practices like Ocean from Kibiso Tama and Johan Betum, among many others, evolved through the recent decades, focused on the problem of form, organization, and the relation to digital tools and authorial processes. And we can say that Farshid practice is one of the most concrete, focused, and coherent, due, I may argue, to the organic relationship between practice and theory. After developing a strong and successful practice with FOA, Farshid moved on to an even more coherent work with Farshid Moussavi Architects, putting together the Function book series and a consistent body of work that includes housing projects, museums, and institutional buildings, among many other developments. So today I will try to focus on a synthesis of her incredible still-growing career by going through what I believe to be some of her greatest achievements. So I will start by sharing my screen. Give me a second. Here we go. Okay. And I will be recording this. Okay. So I would love to start with the project that I believe started it all, the Yokohama Port Terminal. By the time you won the competition back in 1996, if I'm not mistaken, the Guggenheim Museum of Bilbao by Frank Gehry was in the works. I used to say that there are two major contemporary canonic architectural works, and they are Yokohama and Bilbao. Bilbao because it opened the door to thinking that anything could be built, and Yokohama because it opened a wider door for thinking architectural design as a tool that is not only sculptural but organizational. In this sense, the influence that this project had on architectural practice was huge and widely commented. But I would like to ask you if you could describe in your own words this impact you believe this project had and still has in architectural practice today, and how this shaped your practice from then on.
Not 1996, just it doesn't really matter, but 1995. It was the very first project that we secured, say, as a competition, as a commission, and it obviously was the breeding ground for everything that followed. We learned to be, practicing architects in a very fast way. It was a project where we delved into, we had been teaching in parallel at the Architectural Association, and we were very interested in the possibilities of digital tools. We were the first generation to use computers within the design process, as designers using computers. Previous to this, we'd been working at OMA, and in those days, there were technicians working on using computers, and then the designers were drawing by hand. They would sit next door to the technicians and kind of supervise them as they would kind of draw things. And we were the only two people who started, using computers at OMA. And, I remember taking my own laptop or computer into the office. So we knew the power of working with computers, and we were very interested in using it to design because we could evolve the project rather than come up with a finite, let's say, form at the very start, that we could, of course, at any one time as an architect, you come up with the proposal that has a form, but we were very interested in allowing that form to evolve and to use the unpredictabilities as well as additional knowledge that any architect gains along the process as ways to both evolve the project but also question it. This was a chance for us to really test that in our own practice, not just teaching, but to test it in real time. And even though Yokohama finished remarkably similar to the competition images that we had proposed, it also evolved a lot along the way. The structure changed, the geometry changes, even the boundaries of the building change, and still we were using AutoCAD, and it was quite a, let's say, primitive way to incorporate change into the form, but it allowed us to really test the possibilities of engaging the process using digital tools. I think this is and it also, it also allowed us as a very young and small office to do a very large project. I think that was also one of the advantages of it. It also allowed us to almost speak the same language as the Japanese, because the project was being drawn, using CAD language. So, in many ways, it allowed us to really test what we were in parallel teaching. And, testing in those days, also the questions were how to, let's say, blur the distinction between architectural form and kind of urban space, how to blur distinctions between architectural space and kind of engineering space. And these were, we were really able to do this with Yokohama. I mean, there are experiments in Yokohama that one cannot really test with other types of building. Now, we went on to work on some other, landscape infrastructural scale projects, such as, the Barcelona Park, that, again, I think in many ways, follows the lessons learned in Yokohama. But it's kind of purely exterior space, whereas Yokohama has interior and exterior.
And yeah. No, you said that this was like FOA was a very it was a starting practice, or was a little practice. Did you have participated in much competitions when you won Yokohama, or was one of the firsts?
This was the, after OMA, we started teaching at the Architectural Association, and we had an invitation by Alan Balfour, who was the chair of the Architectural Association in those days, to publish our work in the AA files. And of course, we had no built work. And we had just started doing, competitions. We'd done one for the Glass Center in Sunderland in the UK, which remarkably is a kind of a baby of Yokohama in some ways. Not precisely, but we were working with the kind of this, let's say, single surface. We said to ourselves, well, we better enter a number of competitions and do them in the way we think the project should be done, rather than worry about, adapting the project to the tastes of, the jury, or what we think the jury might want. And Yokohama was the first competition where we entered it with that mindset, where we are going to design it as a real project, but as what we think should be the real, rather than what we think other people might want to see the real as. And it's amazing that we won the competition, and of course it was published in the AA files.
And Downsview Park project was shortly after. That was
Which
kind
one?
of a major competition. Downsview Park.
Downsview was a little bit later, but not much more. And it is a really very interesting project. Yeah, we didn't win it, but it allowed us to, work with not, Yokohama deals with, let's say, the topography of the building as a landscape. There is little natural landscape, and Downsview works with topography, but also works with natural vegetation and with, it's a kind of a land engineering, as well as building a kind of a specific ecology.
And do you keep going back to this project or this stage of your practice, your career, to rethink your practice today? Because I believe that this was a moment of where you, as a practitioner, test a very weird ideas for the context. Very avant-garde ideas from what was the context in that middle 90s. Do you keep going to that, to those ideas in search for what you're doing today? Is that kind of a reference for you?
Do you mean context by the kind of the physical context? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the architecturally speaking, right? This is a project that differentiated strongly from.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Well, I mean, in some ways, it is an object building because it's sitting on a pier, so it was always going to be, let's say, marked as something different anyway from the rest of the context of the city. The kind of the building blocks that are nearby. But I would say what has, I would say, it might be some kind of intuitive line, or it might be just a question of coincidence of commissions. I think Yokohama was aiming to create also a certain context of its own along the waterfront. It makes a place, right? Originally, the pier was an anonymous pier, and at the root of it was a kind of a building that was supposed to be a kind of an emblem to travel. We turned the anonymous pier into a pier that is that has a very strong identity. I would say many of the projects that FMA has done recently, maybe even during FOA times, they are placemakers. They make context. They're in places there is not a very strong, let's say, cohesive identity to the context. And we've seen our role as ways in which we would, through the kind of the strong presence that we give to buildings, we bring a certain identity to the area. So maybe the building in Nanterre is a little bit like that. It's sitting in the middle of two cemeteries. Its neighbors in terms of physical form is, the nearest is La Grande Arche, which is like a very big neighbor. And then immediately to its left, there is a kind of an arena. And it's quite difficult as a residential building to be contextual with these things, because there are things that are incredibly different and of a different scale. Yeah. So the building, has its own game and play.
That's nice. That's a very beautiful idea, placemakers. Okay, I will like to move on towards some of your theoretical work and teaching. um, specifically to your Function Of book series. These 3 books are the outcome of the research that you develop through the Function Lab, the research branch of Farshid Moussavi Architecture. And in these books, you approach the problem of affect in architecture through ornament, form, and style. I believe that the power of these books resides in the possibility to think the architectural project outside of the convention of the universal idea of the whole, and in this sense approach those aspects of architecture that has been recently, in historical terms, neglected or diminished. This is the possibility to look at ornament as a project in itself, and the same with form or style. So, do you see contemporary architecture changing towards a broader understanding of ornament and form, and how they impact in the way we perceive architecture?
Big questions. Well, I think that there is a lot of interest in ornament. Form is, I would say, is inescapable for an architect, and style, the way the style book defines it is really to do with the manner in which a certain typology is architecturally assembled, and that's also, I think, inescapable. If you give the same brief to 5 architectural practices, they will all come up with different responses, and the differences between them, whilst conforming to the practical and functional requirements, is what I would call is style. So, I mean, I maybe style was really, there was this idea that, in the 90s, everything looks different, and, everything looks the same also. And the intention of the book is to bring projects that are very similar, to highlight their differences, and to discuss what matters in the differences. If you like, to discuss the agency of the way you give to form to function. That's another way to do it and to look at it. The form book was inspired by a time when we architects, and also at schools, excited by the possibilities of digital tools, were just pushing and pulling things in I don't know, Rhino, and not really thinking about the fact that architectural form ultimately has to deal with structure and gravity, and that the limits of structure and the choices of structure actually give you space for form making, and this is something that has been a kind of an area of experimentation for architects going back to Islamic domes. So the intention of the book was to make a survey of this kind of line of inquiry, architects using structure as form making. And so the chapters of the book were divided into different structural systems, and again, how two architects would use the vault in different ways, or two architects would use the dome in different ways. Architects use structure not for the sake of structure; they use it to make space, to make to make people, give people different kinds of enclosure that have very specific kind of affects. The ornament book was the first, and it was just came out of an observation that architects were increasingly asked to design envelopes, or you could call it facades, and it has a very kind of a thin depth, but if you start to look at that and the kind of choices that you have, again, it in itself is a very fertile space for articulating the presence of buildings in very unique ways. And again, you can look at architects in the 20th century to the present, and we see that they have gone to incredible lengths to make their buildings appear and engage the space around them in very unique ways. I mean, you have 30 St. Mary's Axe here. This is a tower, but it is, it couldn't be also more unlike any tower around it. There is the form, but it's I think what I'm less interested in the form and more interested in the kind of the envelope. It uses a diagrid combined as a structure. It combines it with diamond shaped glass panels, two colors that in combination introduce this kind of spiral around it, and a combination of also the form, which is slightly bulging out and then it goes in again, and the glazing panels means that also no two glass panels are have the same orientation. So it also, when it reflects the sun, there is a kind of a diamond-like flicker from it.
Yeah.
And it just generates many different simultaneously, so many different aspects. And it's a very engaging building, an extremely engaging building. And I think the idea that buildings can also make you think, make you not think anything necessarily specific, but they catch your attention and inspire you, perhaps to look up, to pause, but of course it also speaks to its surrounding buildings in specific ways. I think that we could also say that architects at any one time, they have the scale of ornament with the kind of the building envelope. They have the scale of the entire form, and also they have style to play with. They're all different kind of instruments available to us. Sometimes, depending on the commission, maybe our contribution resides mostly in ornament. But I don't think that means that we lose the possibility to influence how people kind of experience, the city, a certain location, etc.
Yeah, well, I can tell apart these books. I believe that there are three books, but in one sense, they are one big book talking about integration of things. Like you can see ornament in the function of form. I mean, the Mukarna system traditionally is ornament, but you are understanding it as form, as form that creates a space. And there's something that Antoine Picon says in some of his writing, that he's trying to explain this tendency for architecture the last 20-30 years, where ornament and form are kind of eliminating the gap between them, and ornament is becoming form and vice versa. So I believe that that's happening in some ways, but what you're trying to do with these books is saying that it's not only happening now, it's always been this way, you know. So I don't know, you're nevertheless, the most of the architecture that you may see is like trying to build the gap wider, you know. I don't know if you see a tendency for some practices to take those ideas and construct projects where ornament, form, and style can like coexist synthetically, like in one organization, you may say.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if you have all the pages, but
no,
if you go to the that's a pity. If you go to the contents page of the ornament book, it has all of those in the ornament book is actually divided into chapters, and I wish that, let me get it, just 1 second, because I'm pretty sure I have it. Okay, so the ornament book it has basically 4 chapters. The first chapter is form, the second chapter is structure, the third chapter is screen, and the fourth chapter is surface. Right. So I think that, you know, what you said earlier is right. For example, that Mohannas is both ornament and form. The way the ornament book is laid out is to start from, let's say, to think of ornaments as the entire building, then ornament as the structure, then the screen, and then the surface. So the surface would be like just the outside face of the envelope, whereas the screen would be ornament, which is the envelope, but performing both outwardly and inwardly. And then it's the structure, and then it's the entire form. So I think if you look again, you will see that there are projects that combine all of these. But it's ultimately, I think you said something that is absolutely correct. I think what is common in all of these is a claim, I think, with evidence, that architecture is ultimately about assemblage. It's about the assemblage, and it's about how does the assemblage of a variety of physical elements that an architect has at its disposal generates specific experiences through affects, right? Or how it becomes the basis for specific experiences. Right. And I you can do that with the interior of the building. I mean, it seems honestly quite evident. It seems like, well, of course. I think that there is also an attempt to argue that architectural history is also a form of knowledge, and that buildings contain design knowledge, and if we dissociate, and that's why the books are black and white, if we dissociate their specifics that are to do with a particular use or a particular location or a particular time in history, and carry just the information that is of useful knowledge to us, history becomes a tool and knowledge. And so, we don't have to always invent from scratch because there's been thousands of years of, invention.
And how making these books affected your practice? How do you perceive they changed the way or they perfected it, or add new complexities in what you do?
I think slowly I mean, you don't do this. I mean, look, when I did the ornament book, I didn't know I was going to work on the form book. And when I worked on the form book, I didn't know I was going to work on the style book. They kind of evolved out of each other. I think I've become more and more interested in thinking of buildings as assemblages rather than organic wholes. And from that point of view, I would say the work of FMA, it is different to the work of FOA, whilst let's call it even Yokohama. I'm more interested in thinking of buildings as multiplicities than unities. For many reasons. And, I think that many works of FOA ultimately were the unities. There is a single organizing system that organizes everything. And I think I'm more interested in buildings being more open-ended and being more open, and I think there is room for a system, or maybe there is room for, I would say, multiple systems that also have a certain independence from each other.
Right.
And,
And just out of curiosity, is there another one on the works, or are you thinking about making other function of?
No, the functional for now are gone. I just finished a new book using the work of FMA.
Yeah.
That I would say is, there is a limitation to. I really enjoyed looking at work of architects at large, but there is only so much information you can access just looking at buildings from a distance.
Yeah.
And the new book, because I was very interested to dig into the process of the projects and look at the relationship between the process and to try to identify the role of the architect. It was easier to use the work of the office because I have the information, I have detailed information, which I could not have accessed about the work of others. So it's very much about practice, whereas maybe the function books are about design.
Okay, then let's move on. One of your more recent projects, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland. This project works on ideas regarding the object that is clear, but you mentioned that you like this idea of projects being like placemakers, or like they make their own contexts. So my question would be, if you can elaborate on how do you think the relation of the object of the museum, of the building, and the landscape that it proposes is constructed. I mean, you can see from the sky that the building has a strong relationship with its context, and it proposes a landscape that it's not easy to see, you may say.
Yeah. Well, Mocha Cleveland is a small museum, and its site was this kind of triangle that you see. So the kind of the area with this, let's call it stripy paving, and the building. And we could have spread it all on more or less one level. And what we tried to do was, I mean, as you see on the buildings around, they are actually, the building across the street on the right was not even there. They're pretty, on the one hand, anonymous, but they're also taller than what Mocha would have been if we had it one story. So we concentrated it, made a very compact building, so it's multi-story, and put it at the tip of this triangular site so that it marks the corner. I think a combination of its varying plan form from the base to the top, which makes this kind of prism-like shape, and the cladding, which is a black mirror stainless steel, makes the building, I would say, very lively. First of all, the building faces, as you see in this image, either face the ground or the sky. And as a result, they catch differing light, and also all the movement of that happens in the sky or the ground. So on the one hand, its reflectivity and its darkness sometimes distinguishes it from its context. It gives a very strong presence to the museum in this corner. On the other hand, it's a kind of a presence that is shifting literally at any one moment. So I remember when the building was opening and I was staying in a small hotel just a few minutes away, and you don't walk a lot in America. Because I was so nearby, I was walking to the museum, and at the traffic light just across the street, I had to wait for the lights to go green. And the few people who were passing by, I noticed that as they went, their kind of head, as they were walking, head would stay with the building. And I kind of enjoyed that. They were trying to figure it out. Because also, I mean, this image is quite high up, and this one is looking at the glass, but there are other images where you see that we've gone to quite a bit of trouble with the stainless steel cladding to play. Maybe you see it here on the right. It's not about creating true reflections of the context, but being almost a kind of an image machine, because everything gets refracted, it gets deformed, it gets stretched, it gets compressed. And when traffic goes past, it's very funny, because you would see, let's say, a very long trailer would go and suddenly it gets cut off because the face suddenly turns.
Right.
It's very entertaining, the building in some ways. And as you see, the color changes. So it's both very different to the buildings around it, but it's also always in dialogue with them. So I think this is a way that we've made this place using the museum.
Well, I can see a lot of references, like other architects in this building. I can see, well, the plates of the Guggenheim in Bilbao, but I can also see the gaps, the window gaps of Libeskind Jewish Museum. There's also faceted faces of OMA's Casa la Música, for example, or even some of your own Sean Lewis department store and Cineplex in Leicester, about the patterns that you are producing. My question is if you have these or others like projects from other architects or from history taking part in the process. I think we can find that out in your new book, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about it.
Exactly. I am very interested in precedents, and when they are at the forefront, when you are aware of them, I think it's very interesting to work with them. Knowing that you are having a conversation with them in order to not to do them, meaning to do it your way, to do something different, because you would want to do something to experiment. To tell you the truth, you will see in the new book that, for example, the reflectivity of Mocha didn't come necessarily, it came in the third or fourth year of design. So our instinct is always not to repeat, not to repeat, especially ourselves, and to experiment. And Mocha started out being champagne, kind of a champagne gold. Why? Because there is a Frank Gehry building nearby that was silver, I think maybe titanium, and there was another Akron museum that had used aluminum or stainless steel. Again, it was silver, but they were both much larger projects. Mocha wanted us to give them something unique, so we said, okay, we have the budget for aluminum, and since they've used it in silver, let's do it in champagne gold. Now, no one said anything, and at some point, when I was making a presentation to an important donor, potential donor for the building, someone who was on the board of the museum, and obviously very supportive, said to me, I'm not really sure about this champagne gold. Somehow it doesn't seem to be the right thing for a contemporary art museum. And I thought, well, she's so right. It's not right. There's, because it talks about money, etc. It was absolutely the right comment, and it made us go and search for another material. And accidentally, we came across, you look for materials, and you say, what else is available? We came across stainless steel in black. It's kind of a blue-black, and thinking about it, and working with renderings, etc., we realized that a kind of a magic could happen, because it would never be black. You see here, sometimes blue, sometimes gray, because the sky is changing, and also because the fact that it was never going to be uniform, because of the fact that different faces had different orientations. And when we proposed it to the client, because of course they were contemporary art museum, they had seen a lot of artists, they understood the kind of effect that this will have. When we went to planning and we had to take a piece of the material, the immediate worry was, oh my God, this is going to be a black box. And there were some, negative press for a little bit. But of course, when the building opened, I think it has become a much loved, building in the city. As it was not done with Leicester in mind, and there are different reasons to the Leicester project being mirror. We wanted to both work with a pattern, because it is acting like a little bit of a net curtain, semi-disguising the clutter of a department store. But we also wanted to make this pattern not be static and work with this environment, and that's how it came about. So this kind of environmental idea is shared between them, but it doesn't come to repeat the other one. And here we don't generate a pattern. Maybe the pattern we introduced are the stripes, right. Of the horizontal cladding that wraps around face to face, and everything else is really generated almost by accident. Yes, so I think if we have a project where we know the questions or the problems at hand have been dealt with in some way in another project, we don't deny ourselves of looking at it, but we never look to copy it. It's about development. But usually we try to start as fresh as possible, as fresh mind as possible at the beginning of a project.
Right. Well, you talk about patterns, and you said also that you're more interested in assemblages. I believe this building has at least 3 systems, that is the envelope, the stairs, and the interior walls, I may say. And how they connect in a weird way, because they are very different between them. Like the stairs has nothing to do with the envelope, but at the same time they build these overlapping patterns that in a way they build some kind of continuity or fluidness, you may say. Is this a thing? Do you see it this way, or you're trying to do something else?
Yes. I mean, this idea of the building as an assemblage of different systems of different scales. I wouldn't say the stair doesn't have anything to do with the envelope, because the envelope is leaning in, and the stair cascades, but it has to lean following the envelope. So there is a relationship, but one is about a stair, and it's a double-decker stair. We put a egress stair underneath the open stair. So one is about a double-decker stair that saves space, gives people 10 different ways to go up and down through closed routes, open routes, etc. The other one is about enclosure. So they have different, if you like, parameters. What they share is the lean. And from then on, they are different things. The envelope has a diagonal kind of, diagrid, if you like, structure. It's done so that on the outside, it's clad with a rain screen. On the inside, the structure is exposed, and it has this, fire-resistant paint in blue. Those are the specifics. And we intentionally did this to create this kind of, if you like, surface tension between the outside and the inside, and to celebrate the act of entering the museum. So you come into somewhere different. The stair, its system are, the rules you have for the risers and the treads, which have to be according to code. But we made the landings wide so that we encourage people to linger and stop, while, it's all both a space to kind of interact with one another, as well as to climb up or down the building.
It has an inside also, isn't it?
It has an inside. There's a stair, under the stair that you see, and that's the closed route. So it's a fire escape, which we also turned into a sound gallery. We proposed it as a sound gallery because it's completely closed, and there is a lot of sound art. It doesn't need, the kind of the conventional gallery space. So, they touch where they need to, and they develop their own, let's say, space and characteristics otherwise.
Yeah, I really love this building. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
We can move on to even a more recent project. This is La Folie Divine. I think that this may be one of the most original housing buildings from the last years, and it seems that form plays a central role in its development, and opposite to the Museum of Cleveland, it operates with a more continuous and fluid forms. Nevertheless, you can see the levels more defined. That was something that in Cleveland you, on purpose, generate that ambiguity of you don't know how much levels are inside. But you may find that you were dealing with different kind of continuous form. In this case, not defined by the fold, but by the curve or the spline. And I believe that there are at least 3 planes of curved forms, at least. That these are the slabs, the corrugating both of the envelope and the curtains, and the effect generated by the handrails. Can you explain how these are related?
Yeah. So the different curves you're saying?
Yeah, I believe there are different scales.
Well, there are different scales. There are different. So there are the floor slabs, and the slabs. They are intentionally not kind of stacking identically on top of each other in order to create single and triple height balconies that never align in section. And by not aligning them in section, we not only produce a variety of balcony kind of heights, but we also minimize downward overlooking from one neighbor to another. So the idea of this building is that this building is in the south of France, where the weather is great, and people who live there want to reimagine that they would want to enjoy indoor-outdoor living. And if you want your balcony to be an extension of your interior, you want the level of privacy that you have on the inside. You could approach it differently, where you say the outside is the outside and the inside is inside, and so the outside perhaps is more part of the urban space and the inside is more part of the kind of the domestic space. In this project, we wanted to blur the distinction between the two and to really allow people to use their balconies as an extra room. And in order to do that, we were looking for how to introduce, as I said, to embed them with this kind of effect of privacy. So as you see in this plan on the left, the balconies are shaded in dark gray, and you have 180-degree view out with no kind of wall necessary between you and your neighbor, and yet you're not looking at each other. And this same, let's say, criteria of minimizing overlooking is created in a sectional way by having the balcony of the neighbor below, not directly below you, but a little bit around the corner. So there are quite, practical reasons that are used to experiment and generate kind of this form. And then if you go back to the image, you will see that there is another, maybe go to another one previously that you had. Yeah, here. You see that, I don't know, maybe I can highlight it. Do I get the drawing tool? Request, no, I can't, because you've set it up, I can't. If you see underneath the balcony, there is a kind of another curve hanging down from the balcony. Do you see? Maybe you could highlight it if you can draw. This is like the insulation. Yeah, so basically, when there is a room on one floor and below it is a balcony, so it's exterior space, we have to insulate that area, right? So the insulation hangs down below the floor slab. It's almost like a kind of a little, like another curve, smaller. And this happens, so it's the insulation system which introduces another layer of curvature, if you like.
Right.
The handrails obviously have to follow the floor plates, and they run, again, because the floor plates don't align, they don't either. We intentionally made the verticals of the handrails very, very thin rods. As you know, you need to stop people falling through, and especially children. So normally you have plates that are thicker, and when you have a curve, the thick plates can in at a kind of an oblique view make the impression that the handrail is actually solid. We wanted to avoid that, so we've used rods, two rows of them, that together create, the kind of the protection, necessary. But they make the verticals more delicate, and they emphasize. If you go back to those previous ones, they emphasize the horizontal curves. So you see that the top of the handrail is in dialogue with the floor plates, and the verticals appear almost as thin instruments, like a harp. So I think that as an architect, we have quite a lot of different scales of elements that we can give presence to or make less present in order to make, for example, the building more vertical or more horizontal, give it more shade, give it less shade, etc. And I think that all together, maybe if you could go to one of the original, the game in terms of scale is quite different in Mocha and this. Mocha was trying to be scaleless because it had neighbors around that were larger, and we didn't want to make the floors appear so that you kind of don't know how many stories it is. So it works with the affect of scalelessness. Here, it has nothing to do with that. It's a residential building, and we are actually trying to build the scale that is more domestic. And so the floors are kind of clearly marked, and in some ways also what appears to be random, which is not at all random, because as you were showing, there are 4 floor plates that are used in an alternate way, etc. Is also trying to put the building in dialogue with the natural environment around it. If you go again back to there are trees around. We were speaking to the trees. We were speaking, to the world of mushrooms and to the world of trees that are that have a certain irregularity to them. But of course, not just making them irregular. Perhaps the differentiation, or perhaps the irregularity, is a kind of an impression that you perceive, but actually it's generated using very specific systems that are to do with providing 36 apartments that have to have specific sizes. They need to have X amount of daylight, etc., etc.
Yeah. Well, you say this is a residential building, and usually in residential projects, form, it's quite a limitation. Most of all because of the clients, because I don't know, there's some connection with the client, with his house. So how was that process? Was hard to propose this kind of forms, or how that worked?
This project had a very unique situation. It was a competition that the city of Montpellier, the mayor of Montpellier, had launched for a series of folies. And some of them were to be residential and others not. And we were the first folie. And, by calling a residential building a folie is usually a useless building, but, experimental, even bizarre, with its form in order to kind of bring you delight, let's say. And we understood that we were paired with a developer. So our client was a developer, but ultimately it was the city of Montpellier that had to choose from one of these pairings of architects and developers. And we understood that obviously they were trying to throw a completely different lens onto affordable housing, and they wanted it to be spatially, formally unique. They were looking for experimentation. They wanted to shake, the standards that come with affordable housing. Right. We, of course, as an architect, had, that as a challenge, and on the other hand, the challenge of producing the 36 apartments that had to be, built within 3.6 million euros, which is very little money, etc., etc. So, to a greater or lesser extent, I think this is something that obviously architects always find themselves in. Frankly, my experience is that when you don't have this challenge, you don't also rise to your best. Right. I enjoy the challenge, and having said that, we had the mayor of Montpellier pushing or asking for this, and competitions are good for that. They are, we at least lose, most of them. I mean, it's not, you're lucky to win them, but they are, incredible for experimenting and going, on a tangent.
That's great, and it came out wonderfully at the end.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to move on to the final project that we're going to discuss. This is the Ismaili Center in Houston. Can you elaborate on the ideas behind this project? It appears to me that there are new ways here to convey the concept of affect that you've been working on, but there are not that much of information out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, believe me, we've been working on it for 4 years. There's a lot of material, but I think, there is interest to slowly unveil it, let's say. Yeah. This project is a community center for the Ismaili community, foremost. And it is the first Ismaili center in America. But there are Ismaili centers in Toronto, in London, in Dushanbe, in Lisbon. It's a kind of a building type invented by His Highness the Aga Khan, a place that brings the Ismaili community together, but also showcases their architectural heritage. And now this is, there is a kind of a broad, the Ismaili community are Muslims, but a particular branch of, Muslims. But they are actually also from many different, the Muslim world is large. It goes from east to the kind of the west. And we've tried to work perhaps in the heritage of Persian architecture, which, because of where I am originally from. Now, the idea of the Houston Ismaili Center is that it draws Ismailis and non-Ismailis together. That was like something that the brief, wanted us to work with. What we did was take the brief and introduce a number of outdoor and indoor spaces that were not in the brief. And these are the spaces that are common to all. Spaces where anyone can be in, even if you are not invited to an event. They are truly open spaces. Some are outdoor because we are in Houston, and the weather of Houston lends itself to being outside a lot, but of course it also rains, and so the interior, the covered spaces will become an asset during kind of bad weather. If you go to the previous one, in terms of going back to affects, the verandas, if you go back to the exterior view, the verandas the building on every side opens out. It opens itself. So here on the left, so here you're looking from the north now, and so you see that it's basically a tripartite form, and with every volume, it opens out. So the big volume in the middle, you see this very tall veranda, and then you have them on the right and the left, east and west, and on the other side we saw it previously. So it's a building that when you pass by, you perceive openness towards it. You perceive also it as a space for interaction. So we wanted it to be open, and when you go then to inside, there are other aspects of there is a kind of a centrality to this 3 volumes that come together, which is trying to promote gathering of everyone, because every one of these kind of parts or wings have different kinds of programs. So we work with the idea of having separate areas of gathering, grouping or converging everybody in the center, working with verticality, because as you see here, the atrium has a stepped profile, and it ends with an oculus, and it is a building with a prayer hall also. There is obviously faith or religion is very much a layer of, and one of the reasons why people would be there. So the idea that we work with lights all the time, wherever you are in the building, you're drawn to lights. Lights will, in a way, be forming your, how you navigate through the building. So here you see, if you'd come from, the left, it draws you towards the outside, towards this north veranda, but you also draw up. So lights plays in diagonal ways, in vertical ways, in kind of east-west ways. We are working with light quite a lot. But then there is also, going back to our earlier conversation, there is, of course, a layer of ornament in the project, because this is one place where, Islamic architecture has, a very rich history of ornamentation, but as a kind of, and also abstraction, form making. So, playing with domes, playing with kind of geometric patterns, playing with structure, all come into this building as a way to, if you like, root the building in that kind of also history.
Well, there is an integration, a clear integration between architectural forms, Occidental architectural forms, Western architectural forms. You can see Mies in the outside, but in the inside, you also see these geometrical patterns that you're talking about that have a long time going around, also in the East, in the Middle East. So I was wondering about what about the research that you develop? What kind of research that you work with? Because I know you have studied this kind of domes also in the books that we were commenting. But this is a kind of a synthesis that is quite interesting. Like there's Western and Eastern architecture coming together in a very elegant way, you may say.
No, thank you. Well, there is research you do specifically for the project, and there is research that, research or discoveries you've made, long before. I can't say that the form book was, somehow in my mind, in our mind, when we were working on this. But this what appears to be a dome is actually not a dome. The floors of the building are being hung, right? And we work with basically the the way we cut the upper floors to create this kind of hole in them. And it's really the hanging floors, but also the hanging of them and the fact that they are being stepped that defines the profile that reminds you of a dome. It's structurally not a dome.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, here I have this image from AKT, but let's move on to the final part of this conversation. Before asking you about the book, I believe that in your work, both academic and professional practice, this integration of models of the past and present is always there. You just talked about these Islamic domes. Does this has to do with the fact that you always taught architecture courses parallel to designing and building projects? And how important is, in your opinion, to have the chance to teach at the same time that you carry on a practice?
Very important. For me, teaching it allows me to do research, because I'm also trying to create a space of inquiry for my students, rather than just teach them what I know, to put them in a space of inquiry that I think is relevant of our time. So I think it allows me to steal time away from, let's say, day-to-day practice, and do research that perhaps if I didn't have the deadlines of preparing courses, etc., they wouldn't happen, or they wouldn't happen in quite the same time frame. I think that I would say practice benefits from teaching, but teaching also benefits from practice. A lot of what I go and teach is ultimately about practice, but without perhaps all the limitations of practice. So one can be more free and think faster or bigger. So I think the two feed each other. I definitely think so. But and it, as I said, the two in tandem is something that I've always had. And I'm always saying I'm going to stop teaching, and it doesn't happen, because it is both a lot of work and enjoyable.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, to finalize, you talked a little bit about the book. Maybe you want to explain a little more. I believe that this is a book more about your own practice, that you reflect the process of these 4 buildings. I know that one of them is the MOCA, but I don't know which are the other 3. Maybe you can talk a little bit about it.
The 2 housing projects in France, and then the Houston project. I mean, obviously the Houston project is work in progress. I think it uses the work of FMA and it illustrates how we work, but it's also to argue for a certain way of working. It's to argue for how we have found how we find our agency in the process, and to if you like, illustrate that despite all the complexity of the architectural process and the widening of the number of people who are involved, etc., the work of an architect, I would say, is not reduced, and the influence or the impact that an architect can have on the outcome of a project is enormous. But it requires that because the process is unpredictable, because it usually takes 6 to 10 years, that an architect needs to stay tuned, to stay very grounded in the process, to take opportunities of things that come along the way. For example, I mentioned you the colors of mocha changing.
Yeah.
I can't imagine mocha today anything else but that black mirror stainless steel. But it happened in 2010, and the project started in 2006. For 4 years, it was not what it is today. So I think, so it wants to argue for, this more unpredictable process that we find ourselves in as a very fertile ground for experimentation. And on the other hand, it is trying to argue that once the architect has done its job, because the architect, at some point is kind of moves out of the process, buildings have a life of their own, and they stand there without the architect, and they perform through affects. And there is a journey. The second half of each chapter is like a walk through the building and the kind of affects that they present, and therefore why the 4 projects that are documented, why I think they are richer, because being designed as multiplicities, not as unities. They
Right.
present you with different kinds of affects, different kinds of experiences. So, not everybody experiences all of them. The building mocha outside is one thing, inside is another thing. If you decide to enter, you have more of its experiences, and if not, the experience outside is something that will impact you.
And this process is never...
So it's
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Is what?
No, it's never linear.
It's never finished. Never linear. No, we've tried at the beginning of each chapter to map the process, obviously after the fact, to map the process. And if you, for example, compare what I call the rhythm map of MoCA to the Houston project, they are very, very different. The Houston project
Right.
has been a much more extensive. No, it's before this.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have all of them.
No, I only have this.
Yeah.
Two.
Yeah.
We don't want to.
Yeah, they show how what kind of elements we work with at any one time, and the kind of conversations that we find along the way between them, and yeah, to some extent they could have all gone on longer.
Yeah.
But of course, at some point the building has to stop, and that's what it becomes.
Yeah.
And so there is also a kind of an argument against the genius architect that comes up with the project at the beginning and defends it at all costs until the end. This is a very different kind of investigation. It's about openness to things outside of yourself, and truly finding kind of opportunities to make the build, to experiment, but also to make the building relevant.
That's very refreshing to hear. Okay, well, I think we are on time. Thank you very much, Farshid, for doing this. I'm very honored to have the chance to talk with you. It's been a pleasure for me. I don't know if you had a nice time. There's something else you want to add. You didn't have the chance.
Santiago, thank you very much. I'm really honored that you took the time to look at the work, to study the relationship between, you know, the academic work and you know, I thank you for your interest and for your questions, and I did enjoy it. Thank you.
No, thank you, Farshid, and I hope we can chat again soon. Thank you very much for doing this.
Absolutely.
It's been a very great pleasure. See you soon.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.